Good morning. I think we've got our full commission here today. I'm just waiting. I'm just seeing if there's any more people coming into the audience, but I think we're there. Okay. Well, Madam Chair, I think we'll begin. Welcome. This is the 16th of November, 2023 meeting of the Commission of Fine Arts, and on behalf of the Commission, I'd like to welcome applicants and members of the public who are in attendance. Madam Chair, as usual, the first item of business is to approve minutes from the last meeting held on the 19th of November. Okay, well then we will move on. Let me just touch up here. All right, so now we will just move on to the regular presentations. The first case today is an information presentation. This is submitted by the Department of the Army. Regarding the removal of the bronze elements of the Confederate Memorial, which is located in section 16 of Arlington National Cemetery. This is a very unusual case procedurally because it follows language in Public Law 116-283 of 2021 that directs the Secretary of Defense to implement recommendations of a plan submitted by the Commission on the Naming of Items, which is known as the Naming Commissions, the naming of items that commemorate Confederate States of America or any person who served voluntarily with the Confederate States of America. Specifically, the item in question is the Confederate Memorial in the cemetery, which comprises a 32-foot high bronze statuary group set on a granite base. In 1901, Congress authorized that Confederate remains from this cemetery and other locations be reinterred in a special section of the cemetery. At the time, the United Daughters of the Confederacy raised funds for the memorial and commissioned a design from a sculptor and Confederate veteran, Moses Jacob Ezekiel, and eventually this was installed in 1914. The memorial occupies the center of a large landscape circle surrounded by graves arranged around it in concentric circles. It's located at the upper sort of western side of the cemetery near, Fort Myer. The Naming Commission's final report specifically recommended removing the Confederate Memorial from the cemetery. The Department of the Army is now implementing that decision. Specifically, this means removing the bronze elements on the memorial, leaving the granite base and its foundation in place in order to minimize risk of inadvertent disturbance of the surrounding graves. In addition, the Naming Commission report stipulates that this work be planned and coordinated with the Commission of Fine Arts, which is what is before you today. The Commission is not being asked to approve the decision to remove the memorial. It is being asked to advise the cemetery in planning and coordinating the best way to proceed with its removal. This is an ongoing, separate historic preservation and environmental protection federal review process going on with substantial public input, which is currently being undertaken. I should add, we do have a letter which was circulated to you, not addressed to us. We were copied on it. It is from Mr. Vincent Balducci, who is with the Defend Arlington group, basically saying that this assistant, the Section 106 historic preservation review process has been flawed, and they're complaining about that, and they're appealing to the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. Again, this is to another agency. It's relevant to this, but it's not our work in terms of the design review or what's even being asked by that law. So, and we have no other public comment on this today. So with that, we will introduce Caitlin Smith, who is Cultural Resources Program Manager for Engineering, Planning, and Resources at Arlington National Cemetery. So thank you for coming today, Caitlin.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Caitlin Smith, and I am the Cultural Resources Program Manager for Army National Military Cemeteries. On behalf of my agency, I would like to thank the Commission for its time and consideration of this information presentation regarding the Confederate Memorial Removal Project at Arlington National Cemetery. Today, I will be providing background on the project and am seeking advice and comments from the Commission in its advisory capacity. As you have the full digital presentation, I will be focusing on the key points and not reviewing every supporting document. Next slide, please. In the fiscal year 2021 NDAA, Congress directed the establishment of the Commission on the Naming of Items of the DoD that commemorate the Confederate States of America or any person who served voluntarily with the Confederate States of America. This was also known as the Naming Commission. The Naming Commission recommended deconstruction and removal of the bronze elements, and Congress mandated that the Secretary of Defense implement the Naming Commission's recommendations. As such, removal of the Confederate Memorial by Arlington National Cemetery is a non-discretionary action mandated by Congress. As a result, ANMC will remove the bronze elements of the Confederate Memorial, which currently sit on a granite base in the center of Section 16. The Naming Commission also recommended that all work be planned and coordinated with the Commission of Fine Arts. Next slide, please. The memorial is centered in ANC's Section 16, a section which contains the remains of Confederate soldiers. The graves and markers are arranged in concentric circles. There are 441 Confederate-style government-issued white marble grave markers and one private marker in the section. The memorial sculptor, Moses Ezekiel, is buried adjacent to the memorial. A circular drive separates this section from the rest of the cemetery. Next slide, please. Here you see an illustration of the memorial's components. The memorial consists of a 30-foot-tall bronze sculpture atop an approximately 3-foot-tall polished granite base. The top of the sculpture is a larger-than-life female figure that represents the South. She stands upon a pedestal of 4 urns, each representing 1 year of the Civil War. Underneath the urns, a frieze decorated with 14 shields represents the 11 Confederate states and the 3 border states. Below this, a bronze bas-relief depicts 32 mostly life-size sculptures portraying mythical gods alongside Southern soldiers and civilians, including 2 enslaved African Americans. This bas-relief depicts the sculptor's own interpretation of antebellum Southern society as it related to enslavement in the Civil War. Next slide, please. The agency expects to carefully deconstruct, crate, and transport the bronze components to a secure temporary storage facility, pending a final disposition determination, which will be determined in future consultations. The granite pedestal on which the memorial sits will be left in situ. The project does not involve any ground-disturbing activities. While the disassembly work occurs, the surrounding landscape, graves, and headstones will be protected. Staging will occur on the road that surrounds the memorial. Fencing will encircle the section to protect the surrounding area and to ensure the safety of staff and visitors. After disassembly, the site and landscaping will be restored. The appearance and condition of the granite surface beneath the memorial is unknown. It will receive any necessary temporary repairs to ensure the structure is watertight and safe for visitors. Next slide, please. The agency is currently executing a coordinated NEPA and NHPA compliance effort to ensure our federal agency meets the requirements of all applicable laws, policies, and regulations. The agency is analyzing the environmental impacts of the project. In this case, the impacts are related to the deconstruction project and removal of the bronze elements. Next slide, please. In compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act, the agency initiated the Section 106 process earlier this year. Our agency has been consulting with the State Historic Preservation Office, in this case, that's the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, and with the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, consulting parties, and the public. To date, the agency has held 1 public meeting and 2 consulting parties meetings, of which the CFA staff have been participants. The agency is currently developing mitigations to adverse effects with input from consulting parties and the public, which will help to inform a programmatic agreement with entitled and by rights consulting parties. As mandated by Congress, the agency now seeks comments from the CFA regarding the best way to proceed with removal of the Confederate memorial from Arlington National Cemetery. Next slide, please. Here you see a timeline of all compliance actions the agency has taken to date, starting with initiation of the Section 106 process, ongoing consultation with the public and consulting parties, and the current preparation of the agency's environmental assessment. Next slide, please. The next portion of our information presentation consists of supporting documentation, including project site plans, drawings, and elevations. I will touch on them just briefly. Next slide, please. Here is a site plan and illustration of the memorial with notes on site-specific conditions. Next slide, please. Again, another site plan, this one illustrating the plantings, trees, and landscape features. Next slide, please. This drawing shows the limits of construction and probable location of the crane that is required to remove the bronze components from their current location to where they will be crated, then loaded onto trucks for transport. Next slide, please. This drawing shows the contractor's likely transport route through the cemetery. Next slide, please. These next 3 slides include the documentation that the Historic American Building Survey completed for the memorial in 2022, and which will be submitted to the Library of Congress. Consistent with their standards for documenting sculptural objects, HABS generated a photogrammetric model of the memorial, which was then used to create scaled plans and elevations. Next slide, please. These are the south and west elevations of the memorial. Next slide, please. The north and east elevations of the memorial. Next slide, please. The following slides are provided to the Commission as background into the Section 106 process and consultations the agency has undergone since February of this year. Next slide, please. The agency consulted with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources throughout each step of the Section 106 process. This includes the initiation of the process when ANMC identified there was a federal undertaking. Next, the agency identified historic properties that would potentially be affected, identified properties that may be National Register eligible, and we have now provided the DHR with an assessment of effects to those properties. This slide shows the multiple historic districts within the ANC historic district boundaries, including the Arlington House Historic District and the Arlington Memorial Bridge. Next slide, please. This is an excerpt of the agency's identification of the area of potential effect, which describes impacts to the 4 historic districts in and adjacent to the APE, including the Fort Myer Historic District. Note that in bullet point 1, the Confederate Memorial was determined to be individually eligible for the National Register. Next slide, please. This is an excerpt of the agency's identification of historic properties in and adjacent to the APE. Next slide, please. This is an excerpt of the agency's identification of historic properties in the project's viewshed. Next slide, please. The agency has now provided the DHR an assessment of effects and found adverse effects to the Confederate Memorial, the Arlington National Cemetery Historic District, and the Arlington House Historic District. The agency has determined that a programmatic agreement, or PA, is the best course of action to move forward with the resolution of effects in the Section 106 process. The PA will include robust mitigation measures related to the removal of the bronze features of the memorial. The PA will also establish procedures for future consultation on the disposition of the memorial. Next slide, please. The agency is currently working with the entitled by rights parties to develop mitigations for the previously identified adverse effects. The agency is creating these with input provided by the public and consulting parties. These will likely include requirements for documentation, disassembly and storage performance standards, and interpretation. Next slide, please. Furthermore, it will provide guidelines for consultations on disposition, which will include the development of a final disposition plan. Next slide, please. The rest of the slides are provided to the Commission as background, including photo documentation of the memorial and viewshed analyses. I will not speak to these today, but instead I will conclude our agency's presentation and respectfully request the Commission's comments and advice. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any Commission members who have any observations about this presentation?
Just a quick question, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I think Ms. Smith said that there was a few more images that she would not comment on, but then we didn't see them. Did I mistake that?
I'm glad I'm not the only one who didn't see the final images, because during this presentation, I was suddenly flipping back and forth. So you did not see the final images as well?
That's correct. Ms. Smith?
Yes, my apologies. I thought the presentation had been provided to the Commission. We can certainly go through the images. There's about 20 or 30 slides.
I thought you said there were final images.
Yeah, I think as you were talking, I would say probably the last 5 or 6 images, we didn't see the images that you were talking about, not the supporting documentation.
Right.
Oh,
might have been a tech. We're describing here as maybe a technical glitch with the platform, the Zoom platform. Perhaps maybe it's worth just quickly going through these last.
Where would you like me to?
Is that what you're saying?
I can.
No. I just want to make sure the Commission members that we're clear what they're allowed. You want to see these last half dozen or so images, or do you want to see the supporting?
I think it was not the supporting. I think it was the final images. I think I lost it after driving through this, maybe how the truck goes through the cemetery. I'm not sure, but then suddenly all I saw, I didn't see the images. So if you keep on going, and James helped me when we lost it.
No, it's okay.
Keep on going.
So this is the truck route that they showed. You want me to start from here and then go to the end, to the where it says supporting documentation?
Oh, okay. So then actually, were you presenting the supporting documentation, or did you actually stop your images at that last image?
We stopped at that.
Stopped it at the supporting documentation.
Yeah.
Oh,
And is
okay,
there,
so then we weren't really missing anything.
So there is no supporting documentation. That's my question.
No, there is. She just said that there's a lot of detail that she was going, that you had, it was forwarded to you to review. She didn't, in this interest of time, she wasn't going to present it, but we could have her go through it if you would like.
No, that's okay.
I can certainly go through the photos and documentation if you would like.
That was my point of information, Madam Chair. So thank you. I do have some comments if it's time to recognize different commissioners.
Yes.
Could you go to slide 22, please? Here, your presentation addresses the forthcoming production of something called a PA, programmatic agreement. Who are the parties to that agreement? Question. And will the CFA then be part of the groups consulted on the nature and content of that PA?
The Commission staff have been participating in the consulting parties meetings. Those have been our larger consulting parties meetings. We have now moved to the entitled by rights parties. Those parties are the State Historic Preservation Office, in this case, the Virginia DHR, and the ACHP, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and the agency. So those three entities are the required signatories of an agreement.
Do we agree with that, Secretary Lupke? Are we not a signatory to that?
Yes, okay. we normally wouldn't, because first of all, our review is always advisory here, and we are not. We actually don't operate under NEPA. As generally, we are not signatories to such things for projects broadly. It's
Understood. But here I only ask because here Congress is very clear that the CFA shall have a role in these questions, and that's
yeah, but it doesn't. This is actually a separate track. It's not the track that the advice that they're asking us for. It doesn't fall within the NEPA or NHPA silo. Sorry, it sounds very bureaucratic. We're advising anyway, but we're not a signatory. That's the easiest way of describing it.
okay. And then I'm sorry, Madam Chair, go ahead. So that was one question. Thank you. And then and that was a procedural question. With regard to design, this image that's on the screen can help, but other later images can help too. And here we dip into a sort of much more sort of philosophical, art philosophical question, and that is by leaving the plinth, the granite plinth. I understand that, you know, the granite plinth does not carry with it any iconographic content, whereas all of the bronze imagery does. All the bronze material does carry iconographic content, and so I can understand then the idea that one should remove all the bronze and leave the granite because the granite is not objectionable. But what is left behind then is something that's referred to as the presence of absence. And that sounds like a challenging concept. But what you're leaving is the mark of something that's been removed, which raises the question, what has been removed? Which raises the potentially didactic discussion of, and debate, in other words, of the legitimacy of removing that which you are committed to remove. And so I say that if you're going to remove part of it, you should remove all of it. Noted that the CFA shall have a role in these questions, and that's
yeah, but it doesn't. This is actually a separate track. It's not the track that the advice that they're asking us for. It doesn't fall within the NEPA or NHPA silo. Sorry, it sounds very bureaucratic. We're advising anyway, but we're not a signatory. That's the easiest way of describing it.
okay. And then I'm sorry, Madam Chair, go ahead. So that was one question. Thank you. And then and that was a procedural question. With regard to design, this image that's on the screen can help, but other later images can help too. And here we dip into a sort of much more sort of philosophical, art philosophical question, and that is by leaving the plinth, the granite plinth. I understand that, you know, the granite plinth does not carry with it any iconographic content, whereas all of the bronze imagery does. All the bronze material does carry iconographic content, and so I can understand then the idea that one should remove all the bronze and leave the granite because the granite is not objectionable. But what is left behind then is something that's referred to as the presence of absence. And that sounds like a challenging concept. But what you're leaving is the mark of something that's been removed, which raises the question, what has been removed? Which raises the potentially didactic discussion of, and debate, in other words, of the legitimacy of removing that which you are committed to remove. And so I say that if you're going to remove part of it, you should remove all of it. Noted that there are concerns about disturbance of land. There's concerns about disturbance or the very proximate location of a non-combatant burial of the sculptor. But if there's anyone if there's any agency in North America that is expert in care, in excavating next to, immediately adjacent to burial sites, it's Arlington National Cemetery, right? So that doesn't ring as an acceptable objection to the removal of the granite plinth. I'd strongly urge my fellow commissioners to give consideration and joining me in recommending, very strongly recommending, the removal of the entirety of the memorial, including the granite plinth, and then the restoration of the lawn, the green landscape. Clearly, you have the equipment already committed that's capable of removing these large pieces of granite. That's already part of your scope of work of removal of the bronze. And there's easy access provided by the broad pathways at the cardinal points of the circle that lead toward the memorial. So I would strongly urge that. And then one other thing then is to then perhaps plant a tree in the middle, or something along those lines, just simply without dedication, just a magnificent tree that will mature beautifully over the decades and centuries, and leave it at that. I return the microphone to you, Chairman Tsien.
Thank you. Did I see that, Duncan, did you want to make an observation, or Justin?
Sure. I just wanted, Ms. Smith, if you could just say thank you for your presentation and for educating us about this. And our understanding is the Congress has already determined this is leaving, and so they're asking for our feedback on what to do. And my colleague has already recommended that you remove more. But I was just wondering if you could speak to where this is going to. I have read some articles that it might be going to here or there. My initial gut is, this is like a piece of art and, something for the museum's part of our history. And so to preserve it in a history or in a warehouse or in a garden somewhere is appropriate. But what are some of the options for removal? Where would it go?
So at this time, the agency is focused on our requirement to remove the bronze elements by January 1. At this time, we believe they will go to storage, and we are working in our programmatic agreement with the DHR and ACHP an outline for future consultations to continue on the final disposition, where the bronze elements will ultimately go and what the site will ultimately look like. At this time, the bronze will go into storage while we continue those consultations.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from commission members? Thank you, Justin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And yeah, I wanted to concur with Commissioner McCrery. I also had similar concerns about the base. And if you've been following this work nationally with the removal of Confederate monuments and memorials, this is an issue that often results in an indetermined and unresolved condition in public landscapes for extended periods that raise the number of questions that Commissioner McCrery raised. And in this specific case, in the landscape of Arlington National Cemetery, and the specific and particular design of this base and plinth, which is nearly 3 feet from grade, it's still a significant mark in the landscape. And I think that it really requires a certain amount of study and care and consideration that the base is effectively a part of the commemoration. And this is, it's a landscape, and so the level of the land is quite legible. when you're in these spaces. I mean, we even see it in this image, the scale of the other markers, proximate in the cemetery. We know that that base, while relatively not as significant as the bronze elements or having the symbols and markers, it is still a monument in and of itself. So I would concur that I think the removal of the granite base and plinth really should be further considered. And even in the case where, for reasons of budget or logistics or whatever it is that is being considered, that it really be an important step and phase of what is clearly meant to be a reparative action in our most sacred of national landscapes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So unless anybody any other commission members would like to say something, understanding that we have no regulatory power within this issue, I think that there's very strong sense, and I would say a united sense from the commission in terms of what still remains to be done, even as you have this January 1st deadline. We all believe that allowing the plinth to remain is still, in one way or another, a monument. So, Thomas, are we within our jurisdiction or non-jurisdiction to make that as a commission observation?
You can, yeah. I mean, the report requested that you contribute to the planning and coordination of this removal. This is commentary about what should happen. We will summarize this. We've got very consistent commentary here, and we will give that to the ANC and next week informally for them to consider. The question of, first of all, there's the removal, and specifically the bronze elements. Of course, it makes sense to, if you're going to remove the stone, you do that at the same time. But there's also going to be this follow-on part, I'm assuming, about what do you do with what's left, whether it is the foundation and the plinth, or just the foundation, or it's a whole new site. And this question of putting in a tree, we'll put that in there as well. But we would continue to consult with ANC about those next steps.
Will this be the last time that this commission will be able to offer thoughts on this? I say that in part because there's a lot of consideration about the removal. What I haven't heard a whole lot about is what follows this. And
Caitlin,
to echo on what Commissioner McCrery was saying, is that there's going to be this powerful absence in the middle, and there needs to be a lot of thought as to what does happen going forward. So 100 years from now, when somebody goes there and sees this space in the middle, they're going to be scratching their head saying, what was here? Why was it removed? What is here in its place? And so I'd like to hear more about that going forward. So,
Caitlin, should I take a stab at that? Do you want to?
You are free to take a stab. What I can contribute, I believe, is
Go ahead.
Currently in the programmatic agreement that we are working on with the DHR and the ACHP, some of the mitigations, which I know we just briefly showed to you all, we are proposing interpretation on the site and creative ways to show what was there. But we are not creating those in isolation. Those will be developed through consultation. So we do not at this stage have designs for those things. What we have built into the programmatic agreement is the fact that we will continue consultation, that is stated in the agreement, that we will continue to discuss what the final disposition, including what the site looks like and what interpretation looks like. Those consultations will continue. So the CFA staff are participating in those consulting party meetings. And if we do, if changes to the landscape are eventually proposed, one of our requirements when our agency proposes changes to our landscape is we come before the commission. So I believe the project would come before you at that time if we had a proposed change to the landscape. I turn it back over to you, Mr. Lupke.
Thank you.
I was going to say that if there was something new that was a proposal, that is their procedure is to bring it to us. We have some authority to look at that as well.
You said, James, see your final word on this.
Yeah, maybe not final. We hear that this is now to be determined to be reused as a place of interpretation. What does that mean, please? What could it possibly mean?
Not reused as a site of interpretation, but that we would put in update, install interpretation at the site, but what that looks like and what it says has not yet been developed. We have just put into our agreement the fact that that should be one of the mitigations, but what that looks like physically and what the content would be at this stage has not been developed. It's just one of many mitigations being proposed in concept to address adverse effects of the removal under an HPA. Any interpretation we do would be developed in consultation with consulting parties, which includes the CFA. So at this point,
yeah, there's a lot of, sorry, but there's a lot of lingo there. What do you mean by adverse effects? And please speak plainly. What is the intent?
Sure.
Do you intend to reuse this granite plinth for other purposes? Question mark.
At this point, we have not gone that far. All we are doing at this point is we are saying we are required to remove the bronze. The bronze will be removed. At this stage, we are leaving the granite in place to make sure we protect graves and to do minimal disturbance to this section at this time. We have made no plans for the base at this point in time other than to protect and preserve it, and we will continue the discussion on what the section should look like in future consultations.
Thank you.
So I would say that it's very clear what the position is. I think what we are talking about is not only a response to your position, but a larger philosophical question as to what happens as all of these issues are being confronted, and there will be more and more plinths. So it is both a specific observation about what is happening now and a general observation about the future. And I think beyond that, we really can't ask you to answer something that you don't know. Right. And appreciate your attempt to be as clear about what you do know as possible. And I think we also as a commission are attempting to be as clear as possible about what our position is vis-a-vis this and all other future, I don't know what you would call it, leftover pieces when, and it is only going to proliferate. So other than that, I would say, unless there are other observations on this, we might just then thank you for your presentation and move forward. And thank you again, James, for being very, very clear and really, I think, enunciating a very strong general feeling that it's not simply solving the immediate problem at hand, but what does this mean in a much larger scale?
Happy to do so, and thank you for your kind words. I'm prepared to make a motion in this, and so that we can, it's a motion.
There's no action required.
Maybe what we can do is have a resolution so that the record can show the hopefully unanimity of the commission in our recommendation.
You certainly can do that.
I'm not parliamentary procedure, so tell me what you do, Tom.
Honestly, it's never come up before for me to do that. The commentary is the commentary will stand in the letter. If you want to make a resolution, you certainly can.
I would ask the commissioners to join me in unanimity of the larger discussion that I and Commissioner Moore engaged in.
I apologize, James. I don't have a strong feeling about it. I think that, this has already been determined to remove the statue. That's fine. to make a big deal about granted, I don't feel strongly about that. I think we could discuss that for another hour. I don't think it's worth doing to have a resolution. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Duncan.
So, Madam
Well,
Chair,
what I would say is no, I was just going to say it's very clear in the recordings of what we've been talking about that there's very strong feeling from the commission, from most of the commission. And so therefore, I think we can present a very clear position without necessarily needing the resolution.
Yeah, that's fine. We will write it up, and you'll have a chance to look it over, and we'll try to get it out. We'll try to get it out before the holiday, but we'll see.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that would conclude that case then, Madam Chair. Are we ready to move on to the second one? Take a break.
So, yeah.
Okay. Second case before you today is submitted by the Department of the Navy. This is